Joining me, we have Rob D'Amico, former FBI supervisor, former member of FBI's hostage rescue team, and national security and intelligence analyst for MS Now. Joined by Amy Sweezy, former assistant Hennepin County prosecutor, now law professor at the University of Minnesota. Hey, Rob, just give me a quick comment on what you see unfolding there, this kind of thing that erupts out of natural emotion, frustration, anger, however you want to describe it. It's not a sanctioned protest. It doesn't have organizers. Most of those we have seen be incredibly calm. There was commentary that one that grew to about the size of 1,000, or I believe it was 2,000 people in Minneapolis yesterday. There was one arrest out of the whole thing. So does what you see there worry you that it can escalate?
It can always escalate. It can be one event that triggers something. And that's my worry. I'm not for a bunch of violent protesting. I'm glad it's been peaceful on both sides. They're showing some restraint I think on each side. I don't like to see violent protests, but the country's been built on protesting when you feel that the government's doing things that aren't just.
Now, turning to the events of later that evening, things took a dire turn around 9:00 p.m. Eastern Time. It felt like another layer of a troubling authoritarian act unfolded that day. The Trump administration arrested Democratic members of Congress without warrants to hinder their investigations into the Venezuela raid. Judge Barl Howell stepped in with a strong nationwide injunction, blocking the Attorney General Pam Bondi's Justice Department from holding 14 Democratic representatives and senators who had been taken into custody without probable cause. The judge called it systematic retaliation against legislative oversight. It was shocking that members of Congress were being arrested simply for carrying out their duties.
So they don't do other things. I have kids that protest, and I worry always about them doing something or being caught in something that triggers it, or them doing something that justifies law enforcement to do something else. So it's always a tense time. And literally, it's usually one event. It's one person that had a bad day that does something, and it triggers somebody else, and then it spirals.
Which may be happening right now. Those photos we were just seeing, that video, we see somebody being arrested. So I obviously believe somebody did some kind of action that weren't being arrested. Let me get specifically to Wednesday, Rob, and with you as well, Amy, with regard to, the killing of Renee Good. What is your sense of the videos and all these different various angles and how they're being interpreted, Rob? And can you discern the actual sequence of events from what you have watched?
And then there's the jaw-dropping revelation that the Trump administration actually arrested members of Congress, including prominent figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Adam Schiff. This wasn't your typical democratic process. It felt more like something we'd expect in a dictatorship where political opponents get locked up to silence them. This entire operation seemed orchestrated by Attorney General Pam Bondi with the blessing of the White House. Kash Patel's testimony today revealed that there was an injunction preventing 27 planned arrests across the country. It's alarming to think that Bondi's Department of Justice had a specific list targeting Democratic lawmakers aiming to thwart the impeachment investigation and inquiries into operations in Venezuela. The evidence included server logs that pointed to a targeted list, clearly labeled as the Democrats' list. This is more than just an overreach, it's political persecution at its finest. It's difficult to wrap my head around the idea of using the Justice Department as a tool against political adversaries, which is the very thing Trump accused the Democrats of doing, yet they never carried it out. And Judge Howell's ruling really hits hard, condemning these arrests as a form of retaliation against legislative oversight. It's shocking to see how the actions of Bondi's DOJ violated the fundamental principle of separation of powers by attempting to imprison lawmakers for doing their jobs. So here's the deal. The courts just put a stop to Bondi's attempt to arrest members of Congress for trying to investigate the president. It's wild to think about, really. On January 10th, 14 Democratic lawmakers, including AOC and Adam Schiff, found themselves spending a night in federal custody simply because they were looking into Trump's actions. I mean, these are elected officials acting on behalf of the American people, getting locked up by the executive branch while doing their job. That's not law enforcement. enforcement, that's political imprisonment. Now, Bondi is in full-on panic mode. She even canceled her press conference, and her team is in a complete scramble since the server logs revealed this whole targeting operation. The evidence collected by the Democrats shows it wasn't just a case of overzealous prosecution. It was a calculated effort to take out political opponents through arrests. Bondi can't just claim she was doing her job when the facts clearly point to her going after a political enemy list. And then there's Trump's response, which is characteristically out there. He's claiming that judges are protecting corrupt Democrats and celebrating Bondi's actions. He goes so far as to praise the unlawful arrest of Congress members while calling those judges enforcing the Constitution radical. All this while he's facing his own potential arrest in just a few hours. Talk about losing touch with reality, a serious disconnect from any understanding of the constitutional limits on executive power. Let's really unpack what this injunction means. The Trump administration was using the Justice Department to go after political opponents, and this is shaping up to be one of the most serious abuses of power we've seen in American history. It's not just an exaggeration to say that arresting members of Congress to prevent them from investigating the president is something you'd expect from a dictatorship. The legal justification Bondi relied on was obstruction of justice, claiming that these lawmakers were interfering with ongoing investigations by asking for documents and testimony related to the Venezuela raid. But that whole idea completely flips the constitutional structure on its head. Congress has clear constitutional authority to investigate the executive branch, and that's what these lawmakers were trying to do. So here's a really interesting situation that unfolded. You see, Congress has the authority to oversee the executive branch. And guess what? The president can't just claim that congressional investigations get in the way of his executive duties. That's actually part of Congress's job. Bondi seemed to be trying to turn the constitutional responsibilities of the legislative branch into something criminal, which is quite a twist. Now, among those arrested were some key Democratic figures who had been deeply involved in exploring Trump's actions. For instance, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was at the forefront of looking into civilian casualties in Venezuela, while Adam Schiff was managing the Intelligence Committee's investigation into the authorization of a raid. There were also other members of Congress who held roles on judiciary and oversight committees linked to impeachment proceedings. The whole idea behind these arrests seemed to be aimed at crippling the investigation by taking out its leaders. The logs from the servers revealed that this was no ordinary operation. They showed that the Justice Department was actually compiling and refining a list of Democratic members targeted for arrest. And the criteria, not criminal activity, but primarily their roles in oversight. Whenever a member made a public statement about the investigations or even called for documents, they got added to the list. Those who issued subpoenas were prioritized. This is clearly a strategy aimed at curtailing political speech and legislative efforts. Then we had Kash Patel's testimony come out today, which dropped a bombshell confirming that the arrest operation was coordinated with the White House. This meant that Trump himself greenlit the arrests of these opposition legislators. Patel went further to say that arrest lists were discussed in meetings at the Oval Office, with Trump specifically approving the detaining of members who were outspoken about impeachment. The FBI director even testified under oath that the president directed these arrests of political opponents, and that's a serious issue on its own. To top it all off, the constitutional violations here are pretty shocking when you break down what Bondi was attempting. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress all legislative powers, which includes the power to investigate. There's also a provision called the Speech or Debate Clause that protects members from being questioned about their legislative activities elsewhere. Arresting members for carrying out oversight duties completely contradicts those provisions. Bondi wasn't there to enforce the law. She was actually going after the very framework of our Constitution, trying to bypass the checks that Congress has on executive power. So it turns out that there was an injunction put in place that affects the whole country, blocking a total of 27 planned arrests. This means there were 13 more lawmakers targeted on top of the 14 who had already been taken into custody. It seems that the operation to arrest these Democratic legislators was much larger than anyone had realized until the logs from the server came to light. Bondi had a plan to arrest over 24 lawmakers, which was aimed not just at shutting down the ongoing investigation, but also at preventing any future oversight regarding Trump's actions. What's even more troubling is the link to the Venezuela cover-up. These arrests were specifically designed to stop Congress from revealing the civilian casualties tied to war crimes. By arresting investigators before they finished their work, the evidence about 132 dead civilians, 23 of whom were children, could have been swept under the rug. It's clear that the arrests weren't just about obstructing inquiries. They were about avoiding accountability for the tragic deaths of innocent civilians. Now, Bondi's emergency appeal will fail because the violations of constitutional rights are painfully obvious and the evidence of political targeting is crystal clear. No appellate court is going to agree to the arrest of legislators for simply doing their oversight duties. This appeal feels like a desperate move, or perhaps a last-ditch effort to keep up the appearance of a legal process as the whole Justice Department operation crumbles around her. By the next morning, Bondi could find herself facing arrest alongside Trump and Patel. When the injunction was announced, the cheers from congressional allies were a clear indication of just how close they came to mass political imprisonment. The 14 lawmakers who had been detained are now free, while the 13 who were targeted but not yet arrested are protected. The legislative branch can continue its work without the fear of being arrested. The system barely held up, and it was only thanks to judges like Howell who wouldn't allow any constitutional destruction. With this ruling, the count of judicial rebukes against the Trump administration has reached 29, adding to the growing number of federal judges who have determined that Trump's actions were unconstitutional or unlawful. No administration in the history of the United States has ever faced such a high level of judicial pushback. The courts are functioning just as the founders intended, standing firm against executive overreach at every turn. But let's not forget the damage that was done before these checks could take effect is serious and lasting. So when you piece together what Bondi's arrest operation means alongside everything that unfolded today, it's a lot to process. It's quite the scenario we're witnessing. The Trump administration aimed to tighten its grip on power by locking up political rivals, and it seems that only the courts managed to halt a complete breakdown of our constitutional framework. Let's break it down. First off, arresting 14 members of Congress simply for doing their jobs. Oversight investigations is a serious case of political imprisonment. This kind of thing is unheard of in American history and goes against the very core principles of our democracy. Such actions belong in dictatorships, and unfortunately, they were unfolding right here under Trump's orders. Secondly, the Democrats' targeting operation illustrates that what was happening wasn't true law enforcement, but rather political persecution aimed at neutralizing lawmakers who opposed him. It's telling that they were focused on members based on their oversight efforts rather than any actual criminal activity. This is a prime example of how justice was twisted into a weapon, just like Trump accused the Democrats of doing while he was the one putting it into action. Then there's the testimony from Patel, which further shows that the White House was in on this scheme. It means that Trump himself orchestrated the arrest of his political opponents. This is a glaring impeachable offense all on its own. The president instructed the Justice Department to go after those investigating him, which is as clear-cut an example of obstruction and abuse of power as you can find. Next, the nationwide injunction that halted a total of 27 arrests highlights just how extensive this targeting operation was, far beyond what we had been led to believe. Bondi was planning to arrest more than 24 Democratic legislators to silence all oversight efforts. Had that scheme gone through, the harm done to our Constitution would have been nothing short of catastrophic. There's also the connection to a cover-up linked to Venezuela, suggesting that these arrests aim to keep war crimes, including the deaths of 132 civilians, under wraps. By apprehending those who could expose this evidence, they intended to bury any accountability for the loss of innocent lives. This was nothing less than a cover-up buried beneath the guise of political imprisonment. Bondi's evident panic and her canceled press conference really show just how weak her legal standing has become. With evidence of political targeting now out in the open, her emergency appeal is bound to flop. There's even a chance she could end up facing arrest alongside Trump and Patel as the entire leadership of the Justice Department appears to be crumbling. And on a more hopeful note, the members who have been freed, like AOC and Schiff, can now pick up their investigations and prepare for impeachment hearings without the looming threat of arrest hanging over them. The constitutional system managed to hold its ground against an alarming assault, primarily because judges stood firm and wouldn't let it be undermined. Now, looking ahead, it's important to understand the weight of the recent injunction and its significance in this unfolding crisis. We're seeing an administration exposed for its willingness to arrest political adversaries in an attempt to avoid accountability for its wrongdoings. This revelation bolsters the impeachment case against them. It validates the arrest warrant and underscores the necessity for removal. It's no longer just a suggestion, but a vital action that needs to happen. For Bondi, the immediate fallout is quite severe. Her credibility as a law enforcement figure has taken a giant hit. She can't possibly maintain that she's seeking justice when the evidence clearly indicates she was more interested in going after political enemies. Now, any testimony she provides in future proceedings raises eyebrows, and her actions as Attorney General look less like legitimate prosecution and more like a conspiracy. It's a stark shift from being a prosecutor to essentially becoming a defendant. As for impeachment, the arrest of Congress members adds another serious charge to the case against Trump. The founders clearly envisioned abuse of power through political imprisonment as a high crime when they set up the impeachment process. A crucial vote scheduled for 10 p.m. tonight will take into account this extra evidence of authoritarian behavior. Additionally, the ongoing investigations can now proceed without hindrance due to the release of the arrested members. The documents they called for will finally come to light, and the witnesses they've summoned will be able to testify. The truth about Venezuela's war crimes and the cover-up will be laid bare both before Congress and the public. The failed arrest operation only highlights the need for continued oversight. The fact that the Republican defections have reached 52 showcases how revealing the arrest operation has been to their willingness to back Trump. Arresting Democrats to hinder investigations is something that's indefensible regardless of party loyalty. As the extent of this abuse becomes clearer, those defections are picking up speed. The implications for democracy stretch far beyond the immediate situation at hand. The Trump administration has shown a readiness to break boundaries we once thought were unthinkable. They went as far as arresting members of Congress and targeting opponents for prosecution based solely on their speech. The Justice Department was wielded like a weapon against the opposition party. These troubling precedents cannot be overlooked. The impeachment vote is just around the corner, set for 10 C-truce, and there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. The evidence surrounding the congressional arrest is now part of the discussion, which is expected to push the margins even further than what was already anticipated. Trump's actions throughout this whole ordeal are painting a clearer picture of his intent. Instead of sticking to the rules, he seemed to be pushing for more authoritarian control. It's almost comical how he openly called for civil war and labeled the Constitution a scam while simultaneously ordering his FBI director to cover up evidence and telling his attorney general to go after his opponents. Each move he made reinforced this image of a president who completely turned his back on democratic ideals. Now, as we look at what's happening at this moment, Trump is set to be arrested in the morning, and it seems Bondi might soon follow suit. It's going to take quite some time to get the Justice Department cleaned up after all this. Democracy managed to hold on just barely through the night, with some important decisions being made, like the injunction that was issued, which lifted the restrictions on members and exposed the targeting that was going on. So stick around as we witness how these final hours of Trump's presidency unfold.